So, today I was wanting to kind of pick your brain on a theory that I haven't run by you yet. And it's kind of a long-standing theory of mine. But it goes by a lot of things we've already talked about in bits and pieces over the years about like male and female roles and things of that nature. And one of the basic things that I find interesting is that women, by and large, tend to be liberal. Like, I know that's a general statement. I know there's Republican women out there. I'm not trying to be, a catch-all here. But, like, by and large, the plurality of women tend to be liberal. So, like, there's a couple of things that I've noticed within female culture, within things that I've learned that has perpetuated this. Like, I think that, like, not only is there a propensity that if you are a woman, you need to be liberal in order to be like a real woman or to be, into the girls' club, but there are things that you almost have to do to be a victim to perpetuate the idea that you need the system, that you need liberalism, that you need progressivism to further this idea. Because if you aren't a victim and you don't have that emotional connection, or at the very least have a friend who is a victim, so you have that emotional connection that like, when I was in college, Susie, went through something, so therefore it, emotionally weighs over the rest of my life, then I don't think you have as many liberals. What are you writing?
Well, taking notes. So
okay. So the first one is the paid gap disparity bullshit, which like has been ad nauseum debunked. Like there is no one out there who actually believes in a 1-for-1. Women are paid less, and I've heard this argument from many men and many people on the right, but it seems to just get lost on female ears, and maybe you can help me out here, which is one. If I could get away with paying a woman 70 cents on the dollar that I would pay a man, I'd only hire women. Like, as an employer, if I could get away, realistically, with only paying 70% of salary to a woman, I'd only hire women. Like, that's slave labor at that point. Like, that's... But, why would I ever hire a man if I have to pay him 30% more? And I don't know what it is about that argument that women are like... but we are slave laborers and we are blah, 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 blah. Like, because the reality is, for those who don't understand economics or statistics or whatever, is that typically speaking, the way that they get the 70 cents on a dollar is it is not if you have the same job as a man that you are paid 70% as much as the man for the same job. What they are assigning here is that salaries, specifically salaries, over a lifetime, men tend to make 30% more overall. However, that's also including women who, take less hours or take the mommy track or don't take high demand jobs that men do. There's also like higher risk professions that women just tend to not want to get into as much. Like, trash men, for instance. Like, it's a pretty high paying job, but for some reason women just don't want to be covered in sewage and trash all day. Not to mention like high lifting and whatever. So... it's not that women are precluded from going into that profession. It's just not something that, typically speaking, women want to go into. So, like, there's just jobs like that. Like, it's a disparity here in terms of, like, the kinds of professions that men and women tend to choose that differentiates. There's also They did a study in California, though, that I found really interesting because they were trying to prove that theory. But what they ended up proving in studying was the overall income, not just income from a job, but income overall. And what they actually found out is due to divorce and alimony and child support, women actually make more overall in their lifetime when you include those things than men due to, disparities in the courts and what have you. So I find that argument to be just completely debunked. And I want to give you a minute to kind of say why like women don't hear that, or like what it is about that argument that women just don't understand. If I were to guess, it's two factors. One, they want to look at the work that they're doing, right? Like, I'm a mom and I want to be paid for being a mom. And yes, I'm taking a less difficult job, but I'm not being appreciated for the job that I do. So therefore, I want to be paid more for doing less. So I feel like that kind of logic set, because they're looking at their overall work versus like what they're actually doing for the business, like the people actually paying them. Because the way a business works is you provide a service or you provide something to the business, and I pay you for that service. So if you're not actually helping the business make money or helping the business turn a profit, like it doesn't matter that you are at home taking care of a kid. Like your job typically doesn't pay you for those sorts of things. The other one is the one for one where this actually is true is Hollywood. And the reason for that is the female turnover rate in movies, which I find humorous because this is largely female responsible. And here's what I mean by that. Male actors tend to last an ungodly amount of time. So, like, you think George Clooney started his career in, like, the early 90s, right? As the sexiest man alive on ER, and to this day, still considered the sexiest man alive. Women are attracted. I mean, you look at Sean Connery, right? Like, that dude was a geriatric old fuck, and women were still swooning over him. And, like, there was the whole, like, him and Catherine Zeta-Jones were, a love interest at one point in the 90s when there was, like, a 50 or 60-year age gap between the two. And yet, like, women were like, yeah, I could see that, because I could see a 20-year-old woman being attracted to him. So, like, I think this is a female thing. The other part of that is that women tend to be catty towards women. So, if you notice that, like, it's not just that women who tend to base their careers on their looks, like, those looks tend to go away by the time they're, like, I'd say 40 for sure, but, a lot of times by the time they're 30. But there's also a cattiness that women turn on. Like, there's an old joke that, like, I look at women and how they treat each other. Women hate other women. Women understand other women. I don't want to understand women because women understand other women and they hate each other. Like that whole joke. But, like the Anne Hathaways and the, Jennifer Lawrences, like they were really popular for like 5 years. And then the female population turned on them. Like women just were like, ew, her, whatever. And it's funny because those are the same people who grew up loving them. Who supported them and all the things, and then there's like just a turn where like, next thing. So women's careers tend to be much shorter, which, if you think about it from the perspective of in a 20-year cycle, you look at how, like, there is a finite number of leading roles for women, just as like there's a finite number of leading roles for men. So like, if you have the same men over that period of time, of that 20 years, let's say there's, for the sake of even numbers, 10 a year, over 20 years. That's 200 roles. And you have, like the turnover rate is like one male per year. So you have like 9 of the same and 1 new one every year. So like over a period of time, you're going to have much more of those roles going to the same guys. Where, let's say, there's a 5 or a 6 turnover rate on women of that. Because, like I said, there's a 5-year turnover, so that's a much higher turnover rate. You're going to have a lot of different women. So, like, sure, if you look at it, the women are getting paid $5 million. Let's say the men are getting paid $20 million. Like, that's a disparity, and I agree with that. However, $5 million is still nothing to laugh at. So, like, if you think about this from a pure fairness between sexes, what you end up with is a lot more women got that $5 million, which is life-changing. Whereas much fewer men got to the place where they could get that 20. I also think when you're looking at just Hollywood and analytics, because you have something that is a for sure thing, that's bankable, that's known to the audience, that's not so much a flash in the pan or the new thing, there's a reason why those people get paid more over time. But it's a very finite industry. Like, that is true of Hollywood and not very many other industries that are close to that. Like, that's not a secretary, that's not, somebody who works in corporate, that's not whatever. Like, that is specific to modeling and actresses. So because that exists in Hollywood and women in Hollywood speak out about it, people emotionally, because that's the whole point of empathizing with an actor, like they're trying to make you empathize with their performance, empathize with their character. So now they're telling you, well, this isn't fair to me because actor A made 4 times more money than me. And we're like, yeah, that's probably happening to me too. And they start looking at like Jim in The Office, and they're like, I bet he makes 4 times as much as me too. Which, statistically speaking, is not true. I mean, they've actually found that, slightly speaking, for job versus job, like apples to apples, women tend to make a little bit more because employers are actually afraid of that disparity if it ever came out. So they actually end up paying women just a little bit more overall. Not in every case, obviously, but generally speaking. So I feel like this is where the basis of that argument comes from. I feel like it's always tends to be, when you hear from women, either they act like it's fact and don't go into any of the nuance, or they make a very emotional argument. So I just, I feel like I've laid out my case for the first part of this.
Okay, so where do you want to start? Because you went over
a lot of things. So you just take what you want from that, and we can break it down as we go. There's also more things I want to get to, but that was...
Sure. Well, again, where do you want to start? Because what was...
Okay, so the first thing I said is that, typically speaking, like, the argument that women make is that there's a pay disparity.
Oh, well, didn't you start with... the liberal, like why women are more liberal? Because
sure, I have multiple parts to this, but that was part 1 of why I think women tend to be more liberal. So, I mean, if you have something to add, I'm not trying to like...
Sure, well, I'm trying to go in order, but again, you...
Okay, well then I would point it out as 1, I think that women tend to be more liberal because they're being manipulated, and I was going to go into all my points, which I didn't share with you beforehand, so that's why you're being... I think quiet, because you're trying to ascertain everything that I'm saying. And the first point that I'm making is the pay disparity, which I feel like...
Oh, okay, so you want to start with pay disparity.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I think that holistically, it's not an apples to apples comparison if you take men and women at large over all industries, over all time. Like, that to me doesn't make sense statistically. Like, it just, you're not going to, you're looking at two completely different demographics who both lean towards different fields. So looking at men and women holistically from one edge of the country to the other, and saying, oh, well, men earn 10% more. And
30%, but yeah.
Yeah, so men earn 30% more than women, again, I think is stupid. Because you don't take into account how many of those people are dropping out because of injuries, how many of those people are dropping out because of parenthood, how many of those people are dropping out for a plethora of reasons.
Right.
And so, like, that to me just doesn't make sense. If you want to break it down into men and women entering the workforce, sure. But again, holistically, across all industries, again, still not...
Sure.
Whatever. I think that you could holistically maybe narrow it down to 20 to 35-year-olds and say, okay, we're going to look at men and women entering the workforce between 20 and 35. And that to me should be pretty 50-50 because both sexes are entering into the workforce at what should be entry-level jobs.
Sure.
Regardless of whether they're going into...
I don't know if by 35 you're still in an entry-level job, but sure.
In today's market?
Maybe.
But that to me would be a closer comparison. But like holistically over the course of, an entire career, that to me just doesn't make sense at all.
Because you're not talking, I mean, here's the other factor to that, which isn't included in that comparison at all, which is men tend to go for longer hour jobs.
Right.
Jobs with physical risk.
Right. So that's what I was going to talk about also. So the other thing is I mean, I get the whole, what is it, affirmative action, and we need to get, men and women in all roles and blah, blah, blah. And I get that. However, I do have, actual experience in roles that are predominantly one or the other. So, for example, I worked an office job for 12 and a half years.
Sure.
Right? And the office floor was actually predominantly women, which was weird in that the office work we did was primarily for construction type things. So even though we were on the phone in what should have been a male centric subject, it was actually a predominantly female employee base, which was kind of weird because that always kind of got into a weird, well, you guys don't know what you're talking about. Let me talk to your supervisor. Let me talk to your supervisor, and then invariably the supervisor would be female, and they're like, well, can I talk to a man? Nope. No, you can't. We're all female. But what I found what was really interesting is two things. So specifically, there were cases where men were getting paid more than women, which was weird because hold on. Okay. So, which was weird because it's a predominantly female, all across the board, from the lowest position all the way up to the VP, right? But what we found was that the men actually pushed. When they were given their end of year review and they were like, okay, this is, let's say not end of year because that's already done. If the decision has already been made. But let's say your third quarter, right? Your third quarter review, because you're still in play. Your fourth quarter review, it's done. So,
I don't understand why that is, but okay. I feel like there's a lot of context that's missing from this statement.
On your third quarter review, your numbers are still in play. They're still trying to figure out if you're going...
In play for what, I guess?
For your raise.
Okay.
Whereas in your fourth quarter review, that's your final review. The numbers have already been set. You're just being given the report. So what they found was that at the third quarter mark, the men would push and say hold on, let's go back. Let's look at these numbers and go over them one by one. And you need to tell me why I'm not being qualified. So it wasn't a top-down challenge. It was a bottom-up challenge where the men were saying, I see your results, but I'm challenging them. Here is my evidence. Here is my opinion. Here are my stats that I've collected, and I'm challenging your top-down assessment of my performance. And because of that, basically the managers at that point were being set back. You now need to prove it to me because I'm challenging you. And so what happened were the managers were then, I'd say rewarding, but they're rewarding that behavior by then increasing the pay because they don't want to, whether they don't want to accept, they don't want to challenge, they don't want to fight, they don't want the conflict, whatever the reason was, they were getting bigger pay bumps. Whereas women, when they were being given their third quarter review, it was very much, here's your stats, here's where you are, this is what it looks like you're going to get on your fourth quarter review, which was 99% accurate. And so the women were just very got it, thank you for your time, take my report and see my way out.
Right.
So I say that though, but immediately after that, that was filed as a complaint, whatever. Immediately after that, HR then stepped in and actually removed the authority from the managers. So managers no longer had the authority for final approval on raises. So HR actually would dictate to the managers and say, here is a 2%, or not even, it was a 1%. You can go 1% up or down, but they were basically dictating pay raises. So you would actually have to send all of your third quarter reviews to HR with your recommendations, and then HR would come back and say, this is what you're allowed to give within 1%. And oh, by the way, there's a 20% cap. So if you move up on one, that means you have to move down on another because you have to stay within that whole number. Which eliminated that entire thing, because then at the third quarter, if any person, male or female, challenged, the manager basically said, that's great for you, but
I see.
HR can't, I can't do anything about it because HR is the one who really is going to give these numbers. And you can't challenge HR. Like, you have to challenge me.
Sure.
And so they removed that completely.
I feel like you gave me a lot of information that I don't know how relevant it is. Just in the basis that I've heard the argument before that men are more reckless and like assertive when it comes to that thing, which I do think of as being a male trait, especially.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that, is in here is that there is a difference between men and women, like mentally and physically, which I'd had down as my actual last part of this. But yes, I understand that, like, when you are bred to be responsible in like warfare and violence, which is a very male thing and always has been, because I don't think you can be responsible without actually with violence being off the table, because violence is always on the table. So ultimately, if things blow up, men are responsible because they are going to be the ones who are expected to come in and be violent. Whether that's from a military standpoint, whether that's from a policing standpoint, or whatever. There's a reason why men go down on the Titanic. Like, it's inbred into us to take risk. So the idea that women tend to be more agreeable in their personalities, like they're told, like, this is what you're getting, women are more likely to be agreeable. I've heard that argument before, that men who do make more or do get, promoted above their talents because they're more aggressive in seeking it after. I've heard that as a personality thing before.
Yeah, like, to be honest, like, that to me would make sense. Like, if you're trying to tell me that men make more, yeah, because they're more aggressive about it. Mm-hmm. Like, it just is what it is. Like,
but I also think that there's also, with that, typically speaking, men overall are willing to work more hours because there are more women that stay home as mothers, that stay home as whatever. So the onus is on the man to take care of those people. It is. Or there's the other part of this where men, as I've said before, like, historically speaking, only about 50% of men procreate, whereas all of women who are able tend to. Which what that means is that men have a harder time attracting a woman. And men's attractability rate has very little to do with, his looks. That helps, his charisma. Or penis size, or any of the things that people tend to tell you what men are. This number one quality is, can you care for a family?
Sure.
So, if you have a man who's, maybe not good with the women, like, he's looking at this saying, like, look, my 20s are going to suck because I am ugly and I'm dorky and all the things, but if I work really hard and by the time I'm 30, can make, like, a assistant manager.
Sure.
Then maybe I can get married then. Maybe I can find someone who will find me attractive enough because I've done this. Whereas, men don't tend to look at women and think, like, what job does she have? Like, how stable is she? Because what most men look for in a female partner is things like, will she be a good mother? Will she be agreeable? Will I have problems at home?
Sure. I don't know about the hours thing. That would be, I'd be interested to look at, like, an academic report or like an actual hour log. Because again, office job, 12 and a half years. Mm-hmm. Even if you were to take a sample size where it was equal men and women, especially across the board, women were far exceeded men on hours worked. And when I say far exceeded, there was like an office joke where it was like, you don't want to have female leaders because they'll send you emails at literally 5 a.m. And you'll be getting emails at 10 p.m. And I legitimately had female managers who were emailing and working from the hospital. Like, I called my manager, and I remember calling, and her voice sounded weird, and I was telling her there was like this thing that was going on. It's not relevant, but it was important. And I told her, and then she started talking, and I was like, why does your voice sound so weird? And she's like, well, I'm in the hospital. And I was like, why are you even like answering your phone. Like, why?
Right.
What are you doing? But it was a constant thing where.
Well, I actually, like, when I hear that, like, there is an old adage in psychology when you talk about the male brain and female brain, whereas, you know, the male brain is a series of boxes. And nothing, like you put, like, sports in one box, and that's
Sure.
it. You put business in another box, and that's business. And women's brains are you know, the adage is their yarn. Everything crosses
Everything
over.
is connected.
Everything is connected. So, like, I would imagine, like, where the difference is with that isn't necessarily the number of hours worked, but the women tend to want to or try to multitask at a level that men don't.
Right.
Which is also funny in its own right, because when they've studied multitasking, generally speaking, people who say they can multitask and whatever, that people who focus on one thing end up being more productive at
Sure.
everything, because you do one thing and you finish it and you go to the next task and do it, whereas women try and do 8 things at once, which I think, you know, tends to be a childhood thing, like a motherhood thing, because, like, you have children, so you're always having to stop at whatever you're doing. Like, it's much less likely that you're able to focus on one thing at a time because you have children, you have a husband, like,
Right.
there's multiple things. So,
well,
like,
I've heard
the
that
brain
as a
develops.
right. I've heard that as a biological argument that,
Right.
in general, the reason why women can multitask is because they wouldn't be able to survive otherwise.
Right.
Like, if they were only ever going to focus on one thing, literally nothing would ever happen.
Right.
So it's like a needed evolutionary thing. Like,
Sure.
you can't.
Whereas men tend to be the opposite. And and here's the thing, like, if you have a job where you're trying to get a single objective, you're more proficient working that way, whereas, you know, when things are one-off. But you're talking about things being in the morning and at night in the hospital and things of that nature. I wonder if it's straight work from, like, 5 a.m. to, like, you know, 10 p.m. as you called it, or if it's just like she's doing a bunch of different things and then, oh yeah, I have to do this. Whereas men, I feel like, would tend to be like, I start work at X time, I end work at Y time, and I'm probably not going to try and bleed over after that. Like I have now left box A of work, and I am now at home, and I am not going to touch work emails or whatever unless I absolutely have to.
I don't know. I mean, again, this is all anecdotal.
Mm-hmm.
Like, anecdotally, I also know of one person who drives me and his wife nuts, because we used to hang out frequently. And that man never in the 15 years that he's been doing that job has never been disconnected. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's 11 o'clock at night or 8 in the morning. It doesn't matter Saturday, Sunday, like, all the time working. However, the caveat to that is he is in a, like, disaster relief
I gotcha.
position where it's
Well, it's
imperative.
like cops that never, you know,
Right.
do the job.
So, I mean, again, anecdotally, sure, like, I would imagine that if he were in the hospital, he would also be answering the phone. But again, that's a very selective job.
Well, I dated a cop in a small town once, and it was awful, and it was a female, obviously. But, like, you know, if something was going on, like, you know, like, she got her normal hours. So, like, let's say
9 to 5.
Well, I think it was like 12-hour shifts 3 days a week is, I think, the way
Okay.
her shifts worked. But, like, if something was going on in the news, she'd want to go in. We'd be driving around and there would be a car wreck, and, like, there wouldn't be enough police to do traffic, so she'd just pop out and, like, start doing whatever, because, like, I think there's an adrenaline rush to be needed.
Right.
And understanding what it feels like to have, you know, to be down people. Like, you know, there's one cop there trying to deal with both a wreck and traffic, and they were struggling. They were on the struggle bus because, you know, it was one person, and she's like, I can be of use here, and, like, jump in. But I think that in that situation, that's just part of the job. Like, every cop I've ever known is that way.
Sure.
So I don't think that's a male or female thing. I think
I think that's a disaster relief emergency services, because I've known many nurses and doctors, and they have that same thing.
No, I mean, like, you know, I was never a nurse, but I was, combat lifesaver, and like I, medically trained. So like anytime I'm out, if there's ever an emergency, like it's really easy for me to just pick up and try and be helpful, because most people don't know what they're doing, and they freak out during emergencies, and I'm very calm and collected, and so like I like helping, so like I understand that, though I also appreciate not having to do it every day, because like I said, it's all encompassing for people who do that.
Sure.
So whatever, but I feel like we're getting a little bit off topic here, because the point is one, that when you have an apples to oranges comparison of, if let's say hypothetically there's more male lawyers, and you're comparing that to receptionists and saying, well, why come the lawyers make more money? Like, duh.
Sure, yeah.
Like, I mean, like, if you want to say, two career fields that are the same at the same corporation, and they have the same job, who makes more money? I would say it's largely equal, and tends to very minutely favor women, because corporations are so afraid of the tag that men could make more, that they tend to give very marginally more to women in those positions, just because they're so afraid of it ever coming out the opposite.
Sure. And that's really where I was going with that whole HR regulating thing, which was, yes, by and large, men were not, I shouldn't even say by and large, it was very selective, where there was a trend that some men were pushing back, which is within their rights. They can, if they say prove it. I mean, you're the one providing the stats, so prove it. But HR was very quick to say, you know what, if there's even the hint of bias, we're going to squash it.
Well, I mean,
and so that to me was a very that to me was very fair.
Why?
That HR would squash it?
Right, because I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate of a situation that I'm completely outside of and unaware of.
Sure.
So if like give me this, but like if hypothetically the men are indicating that there's a problem with the stats.
Right.
And saying, look, I'm working all of these hours, I'm
doing all of these things,
I'm making more cases, or whatever the criteria was.
Sure.
Again, I didn't work for your job, so I don't know what you're basing your criteria off of, but they're saying, look, I don't know what specifically you're being based off of, so I'm just going to say apples.
Sure.
So the average in the office is 80, I'm making 100, so therefore I should be, I'm doing 20% more in terms of identifiable production, so therefore I should be making 20% more since I'm producing 20% more.
Sure.
Which I feel like is a fair argument. And if HR is like, it doesn't matter how much you work because we don't want to be unfair,
right?
That to me is unfair.
Sure. So I will say in this case, the argument was you need to prove your stats to me from a bottom up, right?
Sure.
Here was the overall thing, which was that the entire office knew the stats were skewed.
How so?
Everybody knew. It was what is it called? A telephone job. What is it called? Telemarketing?
Telemarketing?
No. Anyways, it's a telecommunications environment, right? So
sure.
All the way across the board, everything is stats. How many calls you get, how long the calls are, like turnover, how many cases you get, blah, 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 blah. But the point was that office-wide, male and female, manager or not, everybody knew that the stats were skewed. And it was a constant complaint across the board at every meeting. The stats are skewed.
But what was skewing them?
They were just inaccurate. The context doesn't matter because we would have to get into nuance.
Okay, fair enough.
But regardless, the stats were skewed. And so the constant top-down message was, we know the stats are skewed, and it is being accounted for in your reviews. Exactly, which is an oh god, because then it puts the employees at a complete disadvantage because the employees are being graded on stats that are known to be skewed
and wrong. Let's
wrong.
Say like
they're inaccurate.
Skew is corporate language for wrong.
Yes, and so the top-down message was, don't worry about it. We're going to speak to it in your performance reviews.
I mean, like what I'm hearing is bullshit.
Yes.
So
Hold on.
Okay.
So when the women would go to the meetings, it was very much I've heard the message at every meeting, town hall, skip level review, whatever, that this is the way that it is. And you're basically telling me that there's nothing I can do about it because you're speaking to it in my review.
Sure.
Whereas when men would go to their review, they'd say, I heard what you said, it's still bullshit, and I want to be compensated accordingly. And so it's still the same gender message, which is the females were saying, we get it, we can't do anything about it. And so HR came in and said, look, we're going to squash this as a behavior because either the skewed stats, inaccurate, are going to be equally distributed, or not distributed, what is it called? Like applied to everybody, or they're not.
I mean, here's where I would disagree with what HR's take on this is.
I mean, let's just agree, like, pay disparity conversation aside, this situation is trash.
Absolutely.
What I was talking about really is the gender or the sex behavior, which says that women, again, were more agreeable and more accepting of paying less, whereas men were like, absolutely not, I will not accept your bullshit. You need to compensate me properly.
Correct.
Whereas that's when HR came in and said, we're going to squash this as a behavior because either you're going to compensate everybody equally with skewed stats or allow everybody to challenge the system. And let's be honest, HR is never going to say everybody challenge the system.
Well, I mean, because here's the way I understand stats to work when they're screwed as bad as what you're saying. Is like the average isn't ever going to be correct. Like let's like again, I'm going to use the apples comparison, right? So let's say that we say the average was 80, like I said, and we have 10 people. What that means is that 800 apples were created by everyone.
Right.
And if somehow the system just attributed 80 to every single person, right? And I know for a fact I made 110.
Exactly.
So it's like that tells me that some other people did less than 80.
Sure.
Right? Like if I know that I'm doing above and beyond the average that I'm being attributed to, that means there's somebody else who needs to be de-attributed.
Right.
That like they're doing 50 and like they're taking my average. So of course, if I'm the person that knows, male or female, I did more and I should be compensated rightfully for it.
Correct.
And you're telling me as from the top down, well, the person who did 50 is going to make the same argument. And I'm like, that's bullshit, though.
Yes.
That is absolute and utter horseshit.
Yes. That was literally 12 and a half years of my life. Not even going to lie.
Right.
Which is ridiculous.
Right. I don't know. I mean, that just gives me anxiety thinking about it. So I'm going to actually drop that specific thing because it's not really what we're talking about.
Sure. Wait, hold on. So I do want to talk about, so you said that women will take lesser paying jobs but want to do the same. So, I mean, I've said this before in other conversations where I'm like, I hate to admit this because, like, the girl club is going to come and, like, take my girl card club card and then I'm going to get kicked out. But, I mean, I did it. I will 100% raise my hand and be like, yeah, that thing that you didn't like, I 100% did. I had a kid, did the whole maternity leave thing for however many, the maximum weeks. My kid went into daycare way too soon.
Sure.
Immediately got sick. And when I say sick, I mean we had to rush her to the ER.
Sure.
So we were in the emergency room. It's like midnight. And I called my grandmother and I said, you need to move in with me. The baby is sick. I can't stay home with her. I need to work. You need to move in with me. My grandmother agreed, moved in within 24 hours, right? I want to say I worked for maybe 3 months before I went to my boss and I said, I want a demotion. Like, I request a demotion. And she thought I was nuts. And then I said, I want a demotion and I want the same pay.
You didn't tell me that part before.
I did. And then I said, and I have a solution. Because you can't go to your boss
and ask for that without
a solution. So I said, in the past, I've worked this position. This position is a night job, which has a 30% overage because you're working undesirable hours.
Mm-hmm.
So if I work a minimum of 7 hours within this 30% range, at this salary, I will be within 1% of my pay.
Right.
And it's a significant demotion, and I'm taking a 30% cut. But I'm making up the 30% because I'm working undesirable hours. And politics and timeline aside, I got my request.
Sure.
However, that 100% proves your point in that I absolutely said, this is my tenure, my qualifications, my experience, my education, and I will not work up to my full capacity and my full aptitude, because I'm going to be working a menial job in undesirable hours, because then I can stay home with my kid.
Yeah, I mean, well, I feel like here my greater point was this: women tend to make emotion, like, either one of two things. Either they stick hard, the study with the 70% of the dollar, they take that to be literal, and when you try to explain the nuance, they either don't understand or they willfully don't understand. Like, there was a show I watched. It was kind of one of those shows where the first couple seasons was really good, and then it got really liberal. But like, I'd started it and I wanted to finish it. And Shameless, by the way, I don't know if you're familiar with that show.
I'm not.
Which I actually was going to use as an example here in a minute. But the daughter becomes a welder on the show. And she's looking at her paycheck, and they're like, "Well, you're a woman, so we're paying you 70 cents on the dollar on the show." And like, like there's no company that's like, the woman tax, you're getting less. Because again, if I could get away with that, I would only hire women.
Sure.
Like, if I could literally be like, I only have to pay women 70% as much, every employer on earth would only hire women.
Sure.
But you would never hire a man for a 30% increase in pay. Like that, just like, there's no like bro system in the...
I would disagree, especially in construction and welding jobs. And again, because I worked in a very heavily like construction-y type environment, and I was constantly in talks and communications with hiring managers, supervisors, foremen.
They would pay 30% more.
No, they flat out would. Not that they would pay more, definitely not. They would absolutely pay women less because they were women.
How so?
They just would. It was which was always kind of weird to me. Well, I'll take your welding example. If you know anything about welding, you're pretty much covered from toe to head. Like, you cannot tell. I mean, unless you have double G boobs, you cannot tell the gender of the welder. Their head is covered in a complete full helmet. You've got gloves on, and usually a welder's jacket.
Sure. My family has owned steel plants before.
So what was always funny to me is they would look at the work, right? And they'd be like, okay, this is good work, this is bad work, blah, 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 blah.
Sure.
But if the mask came off and they found out that it was done by a woman, they would dismiss the work. They would rather hire a man than hire a woman to do it, flat out, not a lie. Like, this is across foremen, I mean, by and large, where they're like, we flat out won't hire women
but they're not
welders.
paying less, they're just
not hiring them.
Not hiring.
If they had to hire a woman, they would pay them less.
How would they get, because they would dismiss the work to a lower standard?
Yeah, because when you're hiring a welder, it's based on skill.
Right, like you typically, for those who don't know, like, you are given a welding test, a welding test or a menial job, and then you're graded on how well you perform that, and then the person who's a reviewer comes by and looks at it and says, this is worth such and such an hour, this is worth such and such an hour, blah blah blah.
Incidentally, like, I know how to weld.
Right.
So, like, that's something that I know how to do. And, like, by and large, they're like, it was done by a woman. Must be faulty.
I don't know if that's true.
It was a weird thing. But also, construction sites, So, like I used to work with like a people mover company?
But how can you prove that it's because they're a woman in that case?
Well, that's the thing. You don't have to. If you're the foreman,
Right.
You're just saying quality of work.
Right, but I mean, here's the thing. Like, I know women who are welders right now.
Sure.
And they're doing fairly well. Like, they don't complain about what you're complaining about at all. Like,
Maybe it's an entry level thing.
Oh, well,
like entering the market?
One of them is entry level. Like, Rochelle's oldest daughter, who's like 19,
Yeah.
just got into welding, and she makes really good money, and like they like her work because she's been welding as a hobby since she was very young.
Right, I think she had mentioned that she did it like in high school or
right,
yeah.
Middle school even. Like I mean, yeah. So like I've known them for a while, and yeah, like they've been welding for forever. She's really good, and she gets top mark. I think she makes really good money. Even as like she just got her certifications, I want to say this year, but like she did so well on her certifications because she's been doing it as a hobbyist for so
years.
long that her skills are up there. So like, I'm not saying that there's not an individual foreman who's sexist or whatever, but I honestly would wonder like if you really can't tell, is it an issue of there are fewer women who are into welding, and therefore, like, it's,
I don't know.
An actual, like, hey, your quality isn't up to snuff.
I don't know. The other market that I always thought this one was kind of interesting is, so I used to do a lot of work with it's like a people mover company where you call them and you're like, hey, I just need this many people for a job site, send me 7.
Sure.
And you disperse the jobs like per bid. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So, weirdly, the reason why they didn't want to hire women actually didn't have anything to do with physical skill or capability or wanting to pay them less or more. Weirdly, it was because the injury rate increased. So what they found was that if they put a female on the job site, that basically men would start peacocking. And they would get into like who can do more of the fastest or who can lift more or whatever. And because they are then infighting, their injury rate increased. So they would actually rather not.
Like even the men's injury rate would increase.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Because like it's also funny that you mentioned that because there was a really interesting study done, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago, where it was office work. And they literally found a job where it was just a lot of what was being done was just how many words per minute you were creating in the office. And what they found is when they did men and women, because they did this as a study, like they did men and women separately, men and women together, and all the things. And here's what they found: men, typically speaking, would no matter what, do more than women. However, what they found that was even interesting is when you integrated men and women, specifically when you had attractive women in the office. Men's rates would skyrocket.
Sure, because they were peacocking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, like, the women's rates would actually go down, and the reason they found that is because there was a lot of other things that women in the office were being asked to do when men were in there.
Sure.
So it would be like, like...
Can you go get me this? Can you go blah, 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 blah?
Right, which would affect their, productivity, but the overall productivity of that office would increase because men would... make up the difference from peacocking and trying to show off.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently, so that while that is really good in an office setting, apparently on a construction site...
Not so much, yeah.
Not so much, because not only would the female get injured because she's trying to compete...
With the men.
But then the men are getting injured because they're trying to show off for her. So the foreman was like, look, love to love you.
Right.
You might be a fantastic construction woman, but unless you are... Weirdly, unless you're somebody's wife, not girlfriend, unless you're somebody's wife, I cannot allow you on the work floor. So what they found was that a lot of carpenters need like an assistant, right? Like, go get me this, go hold that, blah, 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 like what's the measurement, whatever. And so if a carpenter brought his wife, who was his assistant, not a problem, because then all of the men would ignore her because...
She's off limits.
She's off limits. She's the dude's wife. Right? And
girlfriend doesn't matter.
Girlfriend doesn't matter. The other one was well, this one is kind of weird because technically, it's not allowed. but like a minor daughter. Like if a carpenter brought in his daughter as like an apprentice, right? Like a bring your daughter to work day.
Like 13, 14 years old.
Yeah, so she's 13, 14, whatever. Also, not a problem. It's off limits. 15 to 18 can't do it.
Well, I think this goes back to what I said earlier about the idea that it's much more difficult for men to get women, so they have to be more showboaty.
Sure.
I actually, I don't want to get into that topic because I actually want to have a separate discussion because I feel like it could warrant a couple hour conversation
Sure.
on its own. But the next thing I want to talk about was the Hollywood example.
Sure. Well, before we get into the Hollywood example, so you also mentioned like needing to get into like the victim club, right? And since we're segueing into Hollywood, I'll give you a Hollywood example, which was, so Taylor Swift did it, where which was always kind of weird to me that she wanted to enter into like the victim club.
Sure.
It was really early on in her career. I want to say she was still a teenager. She was still in the like blonde, wavy-haired look.
I never followed Taylor Swift, so...
So very early on, she actually has come out and said this specifically, that she alters her entire look and hairstyle per album so that when people think of that look, they associate it with that music.
In that era.
In that era.
Okay.
So for Swifties, the like blonde wavy look, she wrote a song about being raped, and they asked her about the song in an interview, of course, and she said, "Oh no, it didn't happen to me." And actually in the music video it's very clear she's actually talking about a friend. And they asked her, "Well, is it true or what have you?" And she says, "Well, I don't want to give away my friend, but yeah, like this is a true story about my friend, and it didn't happen to me, but I wanted, I wanted to identify with that or empathize with that audience. So I wrote this song for my friend and her experience." And so I always thought that was kind of weird, that like, why... Because really, when you write a song and you're in the music video and you're the person singing the song, you're putting yourself in that story.
Sure.
So I always thought that was kind of weird. Like, why would you do that? Especially when you're at the top of your popularity. Sure.
I mean, I wanted to get into sexual assault, but not today. Because what I'm actually looking at the clock is that we're about halfway in, and we've still got about halfway to go with just the pay disparity. So I kind of wanted to hit the sexual victimization of women, maybe a different one, because I feel like I don't want to go back and forth. So I'm not trying to like dismiss the Taylor Swift thing, because that is just, it's a little bizarre.
Well, my like tie-in with that is that it drastically increased her sales, her revenue, like it increased her pay.
Absolutely.
Like that was my tie-in to this, is that she used the victim club to booster her audience and her popularity, her pay, her all the things.
Because here's the thing, right? Again, I feel like we're going to get into a very different thing here, but so I don't ever like to get into a he said she said debate where I don't know any of the parties.
Sure.
And anytime you're talking about a Hollywood story, that's exactly what you're talking about, unless you are, a Hollywood socialite that knows all these people. So I really don't want to get into this. But a lot of the Me Too movement was based on this. So when we talk about Hollywood specifically, but specifically in terms of liberalism, I don't think it's very difficult to assume that Hollywood is a liberal institution.
Oh, yeah. I mean that doesn't even warrant an argument. Like,
right, it does not.
Yes.
So when you talk about these issues, whether it be victimization or pay disparity, I feel like liberal institutions tend to create the problems that they tell you need them to fix.
Yes. I mean, that's not an argument I haven't heard before. Like, that's a rather popular argument about the Liberal Party in general, which is the like leading the question or leading the answer. You ask the question and then answer your own question.
Right. So when you talk about, I don't believe, generally speaking, that the institutions that we have in this country are systemically racist. But
No.
if you were going to make an argument that they were, what you would have is the minimum sentencing and the Crime Bill Act that Joe Biden wrote. It was his only thing that he wrote in his entire time in office. And I don't remember if he was in the Senate or the House of Representatives. I think he was a senator. But as a senator, it was the only bill that he wrote, was this thing talking about drug minimum sentencing. So if you want to talk about like the prison populations, and specifically what drugs would be considered, which tended to be the drugs that were black in nature, like there tend to be things that black people use, there tend to be drugs that white people use. So the black drugs got higher sentencing than white drugs.
Sure.
So if you want to point to that bill and why you have such a high black prison population, you could make that argument. But again, it is a problem that our current president created.
Right, so they don't highlight it.
So they don't highlight it, but then they're like, well, all you have to do is look at the black prison population disparity between whites, and it's like, okay.
Yeah,
like,
but you did it.
But you did it. Like,
right.
you were never going to be the solution to the problem that you created.
Right. I mean, but that, we could give countless examples
Sure.
of, they created a problem.
Right.
And then said, oh, it's a problem, and
you need us to fix that problem.
And you need us to fix that problem, but they never go back and say, like, well, what was the catalyst of the problem?
Right.
Where I feel like that's a very critical thinking thing, is like, that's fine, I understand that this is your problem, and I'm not arguing with you, I'm accepting your problem. What I'm asking is, what was the catalyst? What did we do to get us here?
Sure.
I hate to say that that's a conservative way of thinking, because it really shouldn't be a conservative or a liberal way of thinking. It should just be a critical thinking.
Sure.
But I feel like that has been completely taken out of the liberal
Sure.
thought process, which is, how did we get here? Who did what
Right.
to create this? Not because we're trying to play the blame game,
Sure.
but because you really can't fix something unless you understand how it happened.
Right, I would agree with that. But back to my point is that the Hollywood casting couch has been a known institution in Hollywood for forever. And, when we think about Me Too, the number one thing that I think about is the Weinsteins. Harvey Weinstein, the guy who, had essentially, like, if you wanted to be cast in his movies, you had to sleep with him. And it, supposedly, I mean, this is allegedly, I don't know anything for sure, but like that was, the joke that people had for a long time. And there were, directors who've come out since the Me Too movement that have said, yes, while they weren't involved in it, they were given a list of actresses not to hire. And it's been speculated that the reason they were not to be hired is because
they wouldn't do the thing.
They wouldn't do the thing. So, like, the problem I have, with the Harvey Weinstein case is, he was one of the biggest donors of Hillary Clinton during the 2016 election. Like, I really believe that had Trump not won, that there would have been pressure from the White House to keep that quiet, because I think that the idea of women being molested and tortured, and like I think we all understand that the Hollywood system and becoming an actress, there's certain things that happen that causes trauma, and I think that the liberal institutions want that trauma so that people like Taylor Swift can come out and talk about it, so that then we can perpetuate this idea of victimhood in women generally, when a lot of it comes from the top down, from the liberal establishments such as Hollywood. So I feel like this perpetuation of, we need a problem that we can, purport to fix, so let's keep creating said problem.
Sure.
So, you have the institutions like Hollywood, you have colleges, which, like when you look at the laws for colleges, a lot of times they have their own police force, which means they have their own jurisdiction, which in a lot of times create loopholes for sexual assault and how they're handled. So when you have that as an institution top-down thing, look, I'm not trying by any means to condone the men who are committing these things at college campuses, but if you broadcast, this is something that we are not going to pursue, that we're not going to investigate, that we're not going to prosecute, more people are going to do said thing. If you take any crime on the books...
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. it really doesn't matter if
Right.
if it comes down to we are no longer prosecuting
Murder.
candy theft.
Right.
Well, then suddenly the grocery store will never have candy because it
Right.
will all be stolen.
Right. So
Like-
when you have colleges that are like, we are not going to pursue rape cases, the number of rapes are going to go up.
Of course.
So then the other part to this is you tell women that in order to be apart from men, they need an education. Like, this is a rhetoric that I've heard specifically for women, specifically for their daughters, that in order for them to compete, they need to get educated. So then they
Yes.
go to these institutions to get educated.
And then
where
they get raped.
Then they get raped. So then they're being told by the same institution that's responsible for said rape, by
We're
their
not
professors, that, well, not only are they not prosecuting, but then they get into class and they're being told about how the patriarchy and the whatever, and it makes sense to a degree if you are being raped or a friend of yours in college has been raped, and they're telling you about how men generally are rapists and how men generally are these things. But
Well, also just inundating the media with
Right.
every movie, like every frat movie, every college movie,
Right.
every whatever, there's the one frat house, one dude, one this, one that, that like goes around raping women.
right.
And yeah, you make it a norm.
Right, you normalize it,
Sure.
and then you wonder why it happens. So, like, this happening in Hollywood and it being normalized, I feel like is just, it is what it is. I think the reason why there's so much rape in Hollywood is, of course, like, this is a top-down institution so that these women can, like, share their story when it's being created. But, like, if these institutions cared about women, if these institutions cared about rape, they would fix it in themselves before
Sure.
anywhere else. Like,
Well, not
yeah.
just fix it in themselves, but make that
Right.
a number one top priority crime where it's like,
Right. If you wanted to tell me that you care about rape, what you would do, and I actually support this, and I will say that there is a difference between, like, well, because like rape laws are also weird in different countries, like different parts of the country, like in a state to state thing on like what constitutes as rape.
Yeah.
Because like there's one where like if you don't say yes.
It's
Or-
if you as long as you didn't say a negative,
Right.
like then it's the assumed positive.
Right, but some states actually need you to give a positive for it to be consensual.
Right.
So like if we're making out and I start like,
You actually have to
Going
say
further,
or ask, like,
for every single thing.
Yeah.
So then like I've also heard women say that like, well, it depends on whether I liked it after the fact. So like sometimes I've actually had a woman come to me and tell me like, look, I'm really into BDSM, but I also had I was raped before, previously. So sometimes in the moment, I freeze up and I don't like something. And I'm like, okay, so what do you expect from me? And she's like, well, I expect you to read me to know if I'm enjoying myself. And I'm like, so let me just...
I have to intuit.
Like, I have to intuit how you're feeling at any given moment. So, like let me just paint this scenario for you. You and I are having sex.
Sure.
And you agree to the sex, and we're doing the things that we've agreed to, and midway through you have a panic attack. But you don't tell me that you're having a panic attack or a memory. I'm supposed to intuit and like mentally read you well enough to know that at that moment you've removed consent, even though that you haven't told me anything. And retroactively, you can decide whether you were giving your silent consent or not to prosecute me for like this sounds like the worst possible scenario I can be in. But she was telling me, I was like, this sounds bonkers. Like at this point, like sex is off the table. I just want to have a conversation. Like this is bonkers, and I need you to recognize that you're being crazy, and which didn't go over well, by the way.
Sure.
But like she was telling me that like this is what they're teaching in schools now. Like this is what like Women's Lib is telling her is that that
at any point in time,
that because the man quote unquote has the power. That it is his responsibility to use that power correctly, and therefore, like...
so, like, I'm already... Like, I checked out when you said, because the men have the power...
Well, this is what they're being taught. I'm not arguing
I'm not arguing for you, but what I'm saying is, like, it already doesn't make sense on a basic premise.
Right.
Like, if you're saying men have the power, and so like we need, like, why did you give it to them to begin with? Like you,
Right.
like I don't understand this like women's liberal movement of like we need to take our power back from men, and I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Like I heard the sentence. My question is, going back to that whole critical thinking, what did we do to get here?
Right.
When did they take it from you?
Right.
What man specifically? Like, explain this to me like I was 5, and point to the man who took your power in perpetuity.
Right.
Like, and what man are you taking it back from? Like, so Bob took your power 10 years ago, and you're getting it back from Richard? Like,
right.
Who?
Well, it goes back to the idea of it's like these broken people who are narcissistic. Like you have a narcissist hurt you.
Sure.
And then the narcissist is too powerful, so you can't confront them directly.
Right.
So the next guy who's like, hey, let me help you. You asshole, patriarchy, fuck off. And it's like, this dude had nothing to do with
Bob.
With Bob at all. Like nothing whatsoever. But it's that guy who gets fucked. And then it's like it's the same thing where it's like you're having sex with Richard, and then you have a flashback of Bob, so you charge Richard with rape.
Right. Bob is still fine.
Yes, Bob's still out raping everyone, but Richard's in jail getting like his life destroyed.
Yeah. Like that's what I don't understand about this. Like, again, this really shouldn't be a conservative way of thinking. Like it really needs to be a critical thinking. Like.
Right.
Like, who did this to you, and why do you need it back? Like, I'm not saying that women don't need power. Like, that's not at all what I'm saying. Like, you need authority over your own self.
Right.
But, like, going and saying that, the institution... So, as a brilliant stroke of just political tomfoolery... I mean, I really do actually commend the liberal movement for normalizing words like the institution or the patriarchy, specifically because it is no one. Like, that's a brilliant.
It's a masterstroke.
It's a brilliant stroke of just absolute genius because by convincing an entire generation,
the man.
Yeah, by convincing an entire generation that the patriarchy, the man, the institution, and I really actually love that the man has been taken more and more and more out of conversational speech, and it's more turned into the patriarchy, and it's more turned into the institution. I love that they actually took the specific human out of the dialogue because
it's very
you can't
1984.
You can't point to anybody. You can't say Bob did it. You're like, well, the institution. Who is the institution?
Right.
Point to the institution. Like, again, explain this to me like I were 5.
They can't, and that's why it's a very emotional
brilliant
argument. And that's my whole point, is when you tell people, like, well, if women really were being paid 70 cents on the dollar at every job, I'd only hire women.
Sure.
And they're like, well, that's, like
that's malarkey.
That's malarkey. It's not. I mean, that's as a business owner, if I could get away with paying, I'm getting equal amount of work, which I also feel like is also malarkey. Like, men and women have strengths, and it's like anything dealing with public, like one-on-one, like interpersonal things, women tend to be better and less pushy. If you want a salesperson, men tend to be more pushy. Like, women do okay, like some women do better than others, but like overall...
Well, you always have the, it's the bell curve, which I really hate that, again, that this isn't like a widely known thing. Like, the bell curve, it's a thing. Like, it's a statistical, it happens all the time.
Right.
Statistically, this happens all the time, everywhere. You can't get away from it. The bell curve follows you everywhere, no matter what. And so the fact that you have men and women on the edges of the bell curve, you should have women who fall on the edges of the men characteristic bell curve, and you should have the vice versa. If you don't, then there's something wrong with your stats.
Sure.
So the fact that you have 15 men who are salesmen and 2 women makes sense to me.
Sure.
Because, again, the bell curve.
But what I'm not for is when these institutions are forced to make it even.
Right.
In every job whatsoever. But here's what ends up happening is, women in a lot of types of jobs don't want those jobs. So, like, what you end up with is that regardless of qualification, if you have a field that's predominantly male,
Sure.
and a man or a woman says, I want to be a part of this, and whatever, she's going to get promoted faster, she's going to get hired easier with no qualification check because
For affirmative action.
For affirmative action. And yet, the opposite is never true. There are jobs that are female, like the women tend to focus on. And if a man goes into one of those fields and it's like, hey, I'm more effeminate or whatever, there's nothing wrong with that, but some, like you said, there's a bell curve, there's also men who are going to want to have those characteristics or not want to have those characteristics. They'll have them. And they might want that job. They are not going to be like, we need men in these positions. Like, that never happened.
Well, so like that, so this actually happened in the government. So this was like a specific instance. So I knew a hiring manager who worked for the government, and they were given a brand new team, clean slate. So they're like, look, we need a new team. It's a new department, new everything. You're going to be the manager, so we also need you to hire your own team nationwide, which in the government is very weird.
Yeah, that never happens.
Never happens.
I mean, like, Space Force got to do that, but that's about it.
Yeah, so it's, like, very, very weird because generally speaking, especially if you're on post, like on a military installation, you can go to that installation, and maybe if there's one within, like, 100 miles, you might be able to go to that military installation. But really, you're in your own installation and that surrounding city.
Sure.
So this was just very weird. What happened was this hiring manager, whether he meant to do it or not, hired a team of 6, all men, all white, light brown, like all. And HR actually came down and said, we're opening up a second pool of like 3. And the hiring manager was like, well, I thought I was only going to get 6. And they're like, yeah, you hired all men. You hired all men, white, light brown. That's not allowed. You need to hire some women and a black dude. Like.
And a black woman.
Yeah, or it doesn't matter. They were like, you need to hire a black person and 2 of them need to be female. Like, what you did is
the worst you could.
The worst thing that you could do. And he's like, but these were the most qualified of all the candidates. And HR was like, don't give a fuck.
Right.
Not only that, we also need you to know that within 18 months, we're going to remove 3 positions.
And they're all going to be white dudes.
And that means that you need to pick the whatever. We can't tell you who. Wink, wink. You need to pick 3 to, like, get out of your team within 18 months because you did a thing.
I mean, that's just so bullshit to me. Because I just remember my my ex had a manager who was a black woman.
Yeah.
And, like here's the other thing when it comes to, like, education. Like, one, it's all Marxist bullshit now. Like, when you go to college, like, it's not teaching you how to learn. It's not teaching you tasks. It's rote memorization of bullshit stats that have been skewed and taken out of context. But this black woman who was her boss, she got her doctorate through an institution which the government accredits that takes life experiences and gives you credits.
You had told me about that. That's ridiculous.
So basically, they looked at her and she, like, had to go in and be interviewed, and she was talking about the discrimination that she experienced as a black woman, and they gave her doctoral credits.
Yeah, no.
So now, for her, like, being a victim, which God knows how much of this is real and how much of this is not.
Yeah.
But, like, they teach people how to perceive victimhood now. Like, that's a lot of what college is. So the fact that she was able to sit down and play the game and do the song and dance, they gave her her doctorate.
Yeah, no.
She didn't take any classes. They gave her her doctorate. And, like, you have to pay a fortune to do it. But the thing is when you go into government work as a black woman with a doctorate,
sky's the limit.
Sky's the limit, anything you want. And she was my ex was just telling me how incompetent she was at everything, but she just kept falling upward because anything that was taken against her, she was amazing at victimhood.
Sure.
So, like, if you said anything about her that was negative, it would be that you were perpetuating black female stereotypes.
Sure.
So, what would end up happening is people would be like, look, you are insufferable and, like, awful at your job and the worst. That person, the one who would stand up and be like, I can't do this, you're done. So yeah, like that's where we're getting in a lot of these positions, and that's how you infiltrate these positions of government. Which, whatever. I did want to get into the idea of in the Hollywood system the difference between men and women's salaries, which, in all fairness, tends to be the most public and transparent variation of the men get paid more. Because I think that it is the one place on earth where it is accurate that men, when I say men, I don't mean like the background characters or the bit part actors.
No, you're talking about for the front man.
The front man, the Tom Cruises, the George Clooney's, the Bruce Willis before he had his aphasia. Like the leading men who were leading men for, from Sean Connery, you talk about, like, he got Dr. No in 1964, and I think his last leading man was in the early aughts. So you're looking at 40 years for him. And like, I would say that, you look at Tom Cruise came out in the 80s, it's now 2020, that's, again, 40 years. And he's, no issues of leaving there. Brad Pitt's been in, a main role for 30 years.
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks is, again, about 40 years. It's also really interesting on Tom Hanks because, like, you talk about, like, different things that actors do that, like, you know them for. Do you know what the thing that Tom Hanks is known for on screen? The thing that he does in almost every role? He pees.
That's a weird.
And, like, it's really funny because, like I had this broken down for me in a film class. The reason why he pees in every film, why you associate peeing with Tom Hanks, like the reason why he wanted to be the guy who pees on camera, is it's not a sexy thing, it's not meant to be a dirty thing, but it's meant to be a familial thing.
Well, because that's a joke. There's a whole joke about that the two things that actors or actresses don't ever do in movies is, one, go to the bathroom, like ever. And
eat.
And, pick their nose.
Right.
Like, and even then it's like a joke because if a woman goes into the bathroom, they go to the bathroom, but it's like to cry or to fix their makeup or to like have a conversation, have a conversation with another woman, but they never actually go to the restroom.
Right. Or the one time that they're allowed to pee is if they're in a very emotional and vulnerable place where they're doing their like if they're pregnant.
Oh, that one, yes.
Yeah, that's the one time they're allowed to pee. But no, like Tom Hanks, you typically don't. But like for whatever reason, we think of him as our dad, and that's how one of the like subtle ways that you create. Because it's actually true. Like he peed in Tom Hanks, he peed in Forrest Gump. He peed in The Green Mile. Like there's just so many. Like he had that really long piss take in A League of Their Own.
Oh, that is right.
Like he just continually pees in every film, and it's like a weird thing. But it's also weird in that like the joke for Brad Pitt is that like you typically don't eat in film because nobody looks good while they're chewing, but he looks actually really good chewing. So it's like this really weird specific skill where he looks good chewing food, whereas most people look awful.
It's such a weird.
So he eats in every film, and here's another really weird one too. Like I know you hate Tom Cruise, but most people run, they look like an idiot. Like their body physics, but he looks really good running.
Yeah, so
he runs in every film because like you have this weird thing that not very many people can get away with, and you make it your trope of your character, and that's how you associate certain things because he's a man of action.
Yeah.
And that's how he does it because he's really good at running. Like if he looked like a dunce running like most people do.
Yeah, the horror movie run.
Right.
Yeah,
the horror movie run. Yeah. he wouldn't be the action star. So like you find somebody who looks good running and you make their whole career about him running. And,
that is such a weird.
And like it's really weird that even though like you think of Brad Pitt as like probably the prettiest man that has ever existed, and he doesn't look gross eating. So that's how like even though women like him for obvious reasons, men will relate to him because you saw him eat, which is a very, like, bro thing. Like, we're just eating sandwiches.
That's such a weird...
Right. But, again, the fact that you're able to create these long-standing, like, familial ties with people as an actor to empathize with them on, like...
That are very subtle and you never talk about.
Right. The fact that you're able to have these things is why you're able to have these 30, 40... I'm sure in Tom Cruise's case, 50-year career.
Yeah.
the reason why you're able to do that is because you have built a backstory that goes into every role that they're doing. And women, they don't lose their attraction to these people. It almost becomes lifelong crushes.
Sure.
Whereas men tend to sexualize people on a non, like, personal or intimate level. So
sure,
it's like,
I like their boobs.
Yeah, they look really pretty. I like their boobs. But I like her boobs more because she's younger, and which the younger woman's always going to have better boobs. Like,
sure, but it's also the ass thing. Like, she's got a big ass, or nice.
Whatever your thing is.
Yeah,
but like the ass girl will whatever. But there's very few women that men sexualize for the entirety of their careers because it's not a deep connection. They're not trying to grow with them, or they're not trying to replace their wife. It's just eye candy that is always going to be. Replaceable.
Well, it's like that weird thing where you ask like a guy, like, oh, what was your whatever crush, and they will actually name the year. Like, I like so and so in this year. Like, it's a very specific thing. It's not like, oh, I like insert actress. It's like, no. I like this actress in this year from this movie or from this Playboy poster or whatever.
Sure, because it's funny because like the number one that I hear from men is the Phoebe Cates in Fast Times at Ridgemont coming out of the pool. It's like the iconic whatever. But like if you look at Phoebe Cates now, like I'm not saying that she's ugly, but it's not like what men.
Well, it's not her coming out of in
like that's this iconic exactly. Like she doesn't look the same. It's not the same. It's from that time because you think about who you were then, but it's not about who she is because, I always talk about like Scarlett Johansson, back when she was the sex symbol.
Scarlett Johansson.
It doesn't matter. But anyways, like she was really pretty. She still is. But when she first came out as a kid, she didn't say anything. She said nothing. Like she was a blank slate. She just didn't give her opinions. And I thought that was the most brilliant thing ever because
Black Widow.
Yeah, Black Widow.
Got it.
Because men could project whatever they wanted as a personality. Like, and I think that that's how men think. Like, we don't fall in love with who they are. We much prefer to project what we want into them, which I think is like a very interesting. But like, she nailed it. And the only thing that we knew about her for like the first 5-10 years of her career is that she banged Benicio del Toro in an elevator, which is like. She's the cool chick that'll fuck me in an elevator or whatever. But that's all we knew. And it was like, of course, perfect woman. Because you can project whatever you want to, and now she's a libtard, and like she says things, I'm just like, you're stupid. And I don't want it. And like I told you this before, like my biggest crush in high school was a girl who, I'm not going to say her name, but like I liked her personality in a film.
Right.
And like I would follow her, and it's like all of her interviews were just how far left could I get, like talking about how we needed communism in the United States and like, all the shit, and I was just like, I'm done. Like there's no amount of because I can't project what I want anymore because like I keep running up with the idea of like, you're a piece of shit human being.
Yeah, I mean I had the same thing. Like I had my favorite actress, and then the first time I saw her like in an interview,
I
was like, ugh. But like, why did you have to talk?
Right.
Like I really loved you up until I actually heard you talk, and she was like. It was like a little bit of it was liberal, but it was also this like very impassioned, like, I don't want to be smart. I want to be stupid. I don't want to learn anything. Like, I don't, and I was like, ugh. Who is
this?
Oh no.
Oh God. Well, tell me offline. But no, like, I feel like Hollywood is, one, a piece of crap institution, but two, like, I actually think that in that, like, if you're wanting to get your money back, like, because, like, ultimately, I've wanted to break into independent film. I don't really want to break into the Hollywood system, but, like, I've always kind of come around to the idea that if I'm ever going to do anything, I'm going to produce it myself. So, like, I've dealt with trying to hire people, and it's like, a lot of times you deal with, what am I going to get back from your performance? Because like you can tell me like what you think you should make. Everybody wants more money. Like everybody wants.
I mean, will it be stupid to go and say I want less?
Right. But realistically, if I'm the one paying for a production, what I'm really looking at is one of two things. Either I want the production to be held in such an esteem that I can raise money for my next production.
Sure.
That happens sometimes, but generally speaking, what you want is return on investment. Like I wanna spend $50 million and make $100. You
Right.
know, I wanna, you know, I mean, it's getting crazy now because I remember hearing about how like Avatar, like they spent
Oh God.
billions to make a couple $100 million, which like just like I mean, yeah, you're still making an ROI, but like that, so much of that can go wrong.
Well, not just that, but like it really is to me one of those like how much risk can we take? To me, you know what it is? To me, it's the adrenaline rush of like a director or a producer. I mean, you're much more knowledgeable on the hierarchy of this.
Sure.
But like, how much adrenaline can I get out of this situation where I'm potentially sinking $2 billion? That's
Right.
billion with a B.
Right.
And I might make a couple $100 million, but it's the adrenaline of like
Right.
sinking so much cash into something where to me it's almost like high stakes gambling. Like like the producers and directors of films now really are treating movie making like the most high stakes
I think
gambling.
it's also a prestige thing. Like I produced a film, so like let's say I own a construction company. That's where I get all my money.
Sure.
I'm saying construction because we've been talking construction.
Yeah,
But like
yeah,
let's say I make $100 million on construction, and I can, I remember hearing the backstory of like Kevin Smith was talking about. He did a movie called Cop Out.
Right.
And really, like, what the producer wanted, he wanted to make a Bruce Willis movie. Like, I don't know what he did. It wasn't filmmaking. But, like, he wanted to tell his buddies,
oh, yeah.
I made a Bruce Willis movie.
Yeah.
And the fact that the movie bombed didn't matter.
It was just the fact that he made a Bruce Willis movie.
Right, because, like even though, I don't know how much money he lost or if it broke even. Like that's not the point. That's not even the point of what the guy wanted. He just wanted to say, like...
I did the thing.
I made a Bruce Willis movie. This is mine. That's my name. That's my movie. I paid for it. And, like, I think for people who make a ton of money, like, there is an esteem factor because, like, I'm sure...
Well, it's like the buying a sports league.
Right.
Like, the sports league tanks. They don't have any whatever. They don't win any games. They don't go to any national, whatever. But it's not about that. It's about so-and-so owns whatever sports league. And you're like...
Right, but I also have to imagine, like, when you're going into a business negotiation for construction, you have, like, the thing with Bruce Willis, is the thing, like, yeah, I did that. Like, it just gives you, like, a lean of, like, credibility and,
I don't know,
power.
I think it's just one more thing that is toxic about the Hollywood culture.
Right.
Is like, like, we don't have enough things to have vices about, like... Sure. So now we're going to throw in movie production as high stakes gambling.
Sure.
Because really, how impressive is that to go into a meeting and be like, oh yeah, no, I was so confident about this. I was willing to sink $2.1 billion on the chance that I might make $500 million.
Right.
Like that, mathematically, that is the stupidest.
But then you get the movies where it's like they spend $200 million and they make $30 million back, and everyone just loses their shirt. Like,
yeah,
like I don't know. Like I still think that, like, the less you spend, the higher chance that you're going to make money is. But anyways, to get away from that, my point is still, what do you think about the pay differential between men and women? Like, do you think that...
Well, so interestingly, and I wish I could remember the name of the actress, but it was very, very recently. It was like within the last 6 months or so. And she was in an interview, and they just point blank asked her, like, just flat out. They were like, what do you think about the pay disparity in Hollywood? And I want to say they even prefaced with, what do you think about the pay disparity in Hollywood? You were just in, insert blockbuster here with so-and-so lead actor. And he made making up figures, he made $50 million and you made, $10 million. Right. And I remember actually being quite impressed because I thought that she was going to go like the full victim route and be like, oh, I cried about it and I did this, that, and the other, but they wouldn't do it and whatever. Sure. And she actually very pointedly looked at the interviewer and was like, I didn't deserve it. Right. And the interviewer kind of was like taken aback because I'm sure that they were thinking she was going to go full victim route. And she was like, that doesn't even make sense. Like, why I would command a salary equal to my co-star. First of all, she actually went into detail. She was like, first of all, you know, he and I are co-stars. Second of all, he has more screen time than I do. But also, he has a 30-year career behind him. And I've been making movies for the last 5 years. And so, you know, why would you pay a 5-year tenure actor, you know, $40 million more? You know what I mean? Because she earned, let's say, 10. And she's like, why do I deserve $40 million more to get me up to his, you know, pay? She's like, even in the billing, like when they put the name of the actors, she's like, his name comes first.
I believe that was the Jennifer Lawrence interview with I can't remember the name of the film, but it was Leonardo DiCaprio was the
like she.
Well, I mean,
but I just thought it was so eloquent because she didn't make it an emotional argument. She didn't say like about her feelings, which is very also because I also remember now that you say that her name, I also thought that it was just so weird because she's so awkward, she's so goofy, and actually I really enjoy Jennifer Lawrence, but it was not at all like she doesn't seem like the kind of person to make logistical arguments and like very high-minded and like this doesn't even make sense to me. And I was like, you know what, I respected her so much more after that, where she was like, obviously.
Well, yes and no. So I mean, she's not wrong. Like when but let me start over. The problem I have with that is Jennifer Lawrence, like, came onto the scene with The Hunger Games. Like, everybody remembers that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And she was really big for a couple of years. And then she went off a cliff. Like, her popularity just went off a proverbial cliff. And, like, she took the time after it went off a cliff to have a kid and kind of drop out of things. And I believe that was the first film that she had done in a while. So, like, you know, at the tail end of, you know, like, you have Hunger Games here, and then you have, like, all of her, like, skyrocketing, and then, like, the off-a-cliff moment, and, like, she's trying to go back up again after taking some time off for personal things, is that one of the things people hated her when she was going down the cliff is she was demanding equal pay, equal whatever, and she did the movie Passengers, where she demanded X amount of money, and the problem with that is this. Whenever you have, like, the reason why that a Tom Cruise or a Brad Pitt or a, you know, insert A-list actor here can command, Leonardo DiCaprio can command $30-40 million is that most people won't go see a film without them. They will not. Like, if you just insert a, you know, like...
no-name actor.
A no-name actor or a B-tier actor, you're only going to get B-tier results, typically speaking. So if you're going to get people to, like, pay attention to your film and have it be a A-list film, you need an A-list star.
Okay.
That's just out the gate. And women don't tend to, like, they tend to go in spurts. Like I said, it's about a 4 or 5 year window of their career, typically speaking. Like, sometimes they'll do a little bit of work after, but it's at a much diminished rate. Like, their star, in terms of it being burning bright, it burns bright. You're the it girl for maybe 5 years, but more realistically, like a 2 or 3 year window. Like, you have, like, your breakout role, and then, you know, it's usually in a franchise, and they're promoting you very heavily because, let's be honest, when they discovered you, they got you to sign a contract to do the series at a very diminished rate. So, you know, they're not paying you, so they're trying to, like, build you as a star, and then they're dumping you on the next production to get your money. And then you're like, well, I'm in Hunger Games, and she probably didn't make a ton of money on Hunger Games. Like, let's just be realistic. Like, when they signed her to do Hunger Games, they signed her like hey, you're an unknown, you're top billing, we're going to give you $1 million. And in the second film, we're going to give you $2 million, and in the third film, we're going to give you $3 million, and in the fourth film, we're going to give you $4 million. Right? Like, something like that, which to the average person is life-changing money, but when you think about, like, if they had negotiated her contract at each one, she'd be asking for what she got in Passengers, the movie you like.
Right.
Which I believe was like $20 million. And that movie bombed hard.
It did.
It bombed really hard. But they paid her $20 million, and they paid her co-star, Andy Dwyer from The Office. I always think it was Andy Dwyer, I forget his real name, but they paid him $20 million. So you got $40 million just for the two main actors.
Just the two main actors.
And then you figure, like, the production, the cost, the special effects, all the things. So, like, would it have bombed as hard if you take $20 million off the top and you just put, you know, actress of the week in there? Like, if you're paying her the $2 or $3 million that she was getting paid in Hunger Games. And realistically, I feel like Andy Dwyer like, he was not well established. Like, I like him as an actor and as a human being, but realistically, he was really good in Guardians of the Galaxy. He was really good in Parks and Rec. And that's it. Like, that, I'm not trying to be an asshole, but, like, he's not Tom Cruise. Like, he's not somebody who, like, the problem is a lot of times when you have the sweet buffoon role, you get typecast.
You get typecast.
And it's, like, because, like, the whole idea of, like, what we were saying with Tom Hanks is you can bring that fatherliness to any role that he does. And there's really not, like, a lot to do with a well-meaning buffoon. Like, it's a very, like...
It's a limiting factor, for sure.
It's definitely a limiting factor. And, like, when he's trying to do things currently where he's competent and he's, like, the man... Because I think he just did an Amazon series where he's, like, this ex-Special Forces guy, and he's done Special Forces roles a couple of times. I think he was in, like, the movie where they got Selma.
Regardless, it comes off very forced.
It comes off very forced. Like, I just don't buy it. And it's not that I don't think him as a human being can be that. It's just...
You've convinced me otherwise.
You've convinced me otherwise, and now I'm having to, like, he didn't kill it to such a degree where he showed me something new.
Sure. Well, it's like the, what is it from Men in Black? Will Smith. Mm-hmm. It's like the Will Smith thing, where, I mean, he really was Will Smith playing whatever character for the longest time.
Most actors do that. There's very few actors who are top billing who don't play themselves in every film.
Right, so even, like, it didn't matter what film he was saying, and he actually said the same line. It's when he's fighting. Like, off the top of my head, I can't remember what but it's like maybe 3 or 4 words, and then he's fighting, and he gets knocked down, and he's like, well, I meant to do that, or that's how I fight, or something like that. And he says it in every single film. And it's just...
Right.
But it's that very well-meaning buffoon thing. So then he tried to redirect and do a couple of, like, really hard-line dramas.
Yeah.
And it was
just... No one bought him.
And you just can't... I mean, if you convince me otherwise...
Right.
Because now you have... The problem with the well-meaning buffoon typecast is that me, as the audience... I have to accept the fact, right? Because at this point, it's no longer a premise. I have to accept the fact that I'm wrong about you, the actor. And so, like, asking the audience, by and large, to accept the fact that the audience is wrong, like, they're like, why would I accept that I'm wrong when I could very easily be like, no, you're stupid? Very
few actors disappear into their role where you just buy it, and most people play themselves in every film, and I totally agree. But yeah, like, my point is that film was doomed from the get-go. I know you liked it, I did not, but I think just fundamentally and conceptually it was doomed from the outset. And here's the thing is, like, whenever you're taking a risk, like, one of the things that Marvel has done exceedingly well is they know the IP sells itself. Like, people know who Iron Man is. People know who, Captain America is. So, like, they want to get competent actors to fill these roles, but they don't necessarily need to get stars to sell you on them. Like, nobody knew who Chris Hemsworth was before Thor.
Sure.
So they lock them into these long-term deals, and basically here's the arrangement that Marvel makes with its actors. We're going to make you really famous.
Sure.
We're not going to pay you shit, because we need to keep our overhead as low as possible to do this great thing. You're going to take that popularity and get work elsewhere and get what you can.
Sure.
And that's what they do. I mean, the one exception to that, which they got early on, was the Iron Man actor, Robert Downey Jr. Like, he actually got a percentage, which is ungodly. Like, people think, like, I think the last Avengers movie made, like, $2.8 billion.
Yeah.
He got, like, 10%.
Jesus.
Or, like, 5%. It doesn't matter. But, like, what percentage of
it does, yeah, 2.8 billion, insert percentage here. I mean, that's grocery money for life.
Yes. Yeah, that man's never struggling.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, but for the most part, most of the actors are interchangeable, and they don't care about them, because the idea is as long as you're competent, there's plenty of competent actors out there. As long as you're competent and we don't have to pay you, it doesn't matter. Like, we're going to make more money doing it this way, and that they do the same thing with directors, because like the old guard of like Hollywood directors who were named directors, you had to pay them, and a lot of times you had to pay them a percentage of their films, because if you think about it, like, you know, Christopher Nolan is probably like the biggest auteur of this generation. It takes him 3 years to make a film, and he's all in for that 3 years. Like, he might take 6 months from the end of the last film to kind of relax and recharge, but like, typically speaking, you have a year of writing that he does, a year of
And who is this?
Christopher Nolan. He did the Dark Knight trilogy. He did Inception. He did...
that guy.
Yeah, but it takes him 3 years, because there's a year of writing, there's a year of pre-production, and then you have like a year of production and post-production, and then it comes out, and it's like 3 years that he's all in living a film. So he wants a percentage of what he does. He's going to put a lot of himself into it,
Sure.
and whatever, but like, he wants to be paid handsomely, and I'm sure that he is. Like, I'm sure.
Inception was phenomenal.
Right. But what you end up with in the Marvel model is, we don't hire A-list directors, we don't want to pay you. So they get competent directors who are basically given a shot list from the producers, and it's very producer top-down heavy, and they've tried to bring in good directors, and it's a meat grinder. Like, they're really only meant to be technically proficient.
Right.
And they're not really designed to create something artistically...
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Well, but that I feel like is true of any franchise.
Mm-hmm.
Like, anytime that you have a franchise, it really is like a pay your dues, industry thing, where it's like, look, it's a franchise, like, you can get your name out there, like,
But they're not really. I mean, the problem is like, you're never really going to get your name out there as being independent from doing a cookie cutter thing, because people don't really think of you as having a vision, because you're not really
you're not inserting yourself.
Right.
Well, what's funny is like they tried to do that with the Harry Potter franchise, where the first, I want to say 3 films had the same director, but the first 2 films,
Chris Columbus,
but the third film had a different director,
right.
And so he tried very hard to like insert himself
and have an artistic,
and so like the costumes changed, and like the hairstyles or whatever, like he very much tried to be like, well, that was because I was whatever, but it just comes off as like the movie growing up. Well, it doesn't come off as
it's actually
the director.
Funny. It's really funny that you mentioned that, because the guy who does most of the literature on that director, I actually studied under him. And he loves Harry Potter 3.
Sure.
Loves Harry Potter 3. And, I've since kind of come out against Harry Potter because of the whole pagan thing, but I actually had read the books. And I loved the 3rd book. It was my favorite book of the entire series. In my opinion, it was just the best one.
Sure.
And he ruined it, because he made it about him and what he wanted to say, and he actually took out most of the meat of the book.
He really did.
To do it. And to me, he ruined the book. And I'm like, when I was having this conversation with the professor, he would be like, I hated the first 2 films. I hate Christopher Columbus, or Chris Columbus, excuse me. I'm sorry, his name's Chris Columbus.
Yeah, I mean, your parents did that to you, but sorry.
But he hated Chris Columbus. He's like, he's a hack. But I was like, but if you like the books, he got everything
He got him right.
Whereas the 3rd guy, like, he made it about himself.
He very much was like, this is a reflection of me. I'm trying to like make a statement. I'm trying to like make a, I am who I am, regardless of.
And then Yates, who did 4 through 7, the rest of the films, I hated him. Like, I feel like from 4 on, you were done. I was done. They didn't improve.
No, they didn't. And really, if you talk to like Harry Potter fans, that's their main complaint. Their main complaint is, I love 1 and 2 because whenever you're converting a book to a movie, I mean, you're always going to have things that get left out and whatnot.
Sure.
But like, it's as close to the book as you can get. Whereas from 3 onward.
Right.
And what's funny is that they almost try to split the difference and say, well, it's not the director's fault, except for 3. 3, everybody agrees on director's fault.
But like, all the film critics love 3 because it's the most auteurish.
But from 4 onward, they try to split the difference and say, well, there's no way a director could take a book that big and squeeze it down into. So they try to split the difference and say, well, it was the director's fault, but really, it was the book was too much.
Right, and here's the thing. I feel like at that point, and I would agree. 4 is the first book to hit a certain page. Like if you look at the books, 1 and 2 is kind of small.
Yeah.
3 is a little bit bigger, but 4 is the first one that feels like a tomb.
Yeah, like it's significant.
Right, and I feel like from then on, splitting them in 2 made sense. Because, I thought they did a decent job in 4.
Well, either that or you were going to have a very Casablanca feel where...
The density.
Where you were going to need to have a director who had studied Casablanca. And this was going to be...
Casablanca is your movie for density.
But, like, it's one of those things, like, I feel like it's one of those movies that everybody can immediately be like, oh, because it's dense.
Right.
You know what I mean? But you were going to have a director who's going to do that, where you were going to have all this, like, background thing happening. And from a production standpoint, I don't know how much time that would have added, because the other thing that they were up against was aging actors.
Right.
I mean, you can't stop a kid from growing.
Right. I mean, I want to say that everyone in the cast was like 28 by the time the last movie came out, or something like that. I mean, like mid to late 20s. I don't remember. And it's funny because, like, in the first film, you can obviously tell they're all actually that age, and actually children, and it's like it took them forever to actually make those films, because I would just imagine with special effects and everything. Plus, not to mention, like, there are laws about how many hours a child can work.
Right.
So, like even they were up against it on that, but. Regardless, do you agree with the idea of... Because here's my take on this.
Do I agree with the pay disparity?
The pay disparity, because here's my take on it. Here's my argument. If you have a realistically 3 to 5 year window as a female, you're going to get turnover. There's always going to be the new hot girl. So, like, maybe, like, let's say, I don't know what the actual pay was, but, like, you do a high female role, like Hunger Games, right? And you get paid a couple $1 million. That's life-changing money.
Sure.
So if I'm a male and I want that, to get paid that $3 to $5 million as like my entry level, like, I'm not getting paid what George Clooney's getting paid, but life-changing money. I'm not as likely to get that role because it doesn't exist. There's no turnover, and I now have to wait for George Clooney or Tom Cruise
to die
and like get his way out. And like, there's very few new spots that are available for male actors. So like, sure, it's great for those that are at the top 0.0001%, but for everyone else, you're screwed. You're never going to make that 4 or 5 million. Whereas women, you have a lot higher opportunity to have that turnover rate to get, sure, it's less, but I think from an overall quality of life, there are more women that are getting a good opportunity and getting a life-changing thing. I will also say that from the producers...
I don't think that that's a fair assessment, though, in general. Like, saying that, you got one opportunity to make life-changing money, like, that's, like, that it's worth it. Like, I don't think that argument is worth anything. Because, so, let's just say me, right? Right off the street at 35. I decide to go to Hollywood.
Right.
And make one movie. And make $3 to $5 million.
Sure.
Like, that's not how that works. No. Like, it's not like I can go to, let's say, a big corporation, AT&T. So it's not like if I go to AT&T and go to the recruiter and say, hey, I know that you guys hire, 100 people a year,
right?
And you pay them $3.5 million. What are the qualifications for that? And they say, here are the qualifications.
Right.
It's 100 people a year, and you only get one chance. We never hire anybody twice. I mean, sure, like, I'd shoot my shot. Like, okay, what are the qualifications? Can I get there? Whatever.
Right.
That's like a thing. But, like, nobody goes to Hollywood and says, okay, my goal is to make $3.5 million, turn around and go home and go to the farm.
Sure. And the problem is a lot of the women who make the 2 movies for $5 million, they end up getting, like, they think that it's going to be there forever, and it's not, because, again, their window is much shorter.
Sure.
So then they blow that money on whatever, and then they end up destitute, and then there's no more roles. Like, that's a lot of what happens.
But that's my point. Like, saying that it's like a fair job, like, you have more opportunity, like, women have more opportunity to make this $3 million than men do, like, like, oh, okay, so, but what does that mean in actuality?
Well,
Like,
I mean, here's the thing: the difference in terms of, like, let's take, I don't know, like, let's take. Here's a really good example. Let's take a really good example here. You have Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet, like
Right.
the Titanic couple, right?
right.
So, I will say this: Kate Winslet is a phenomenal actress.
Sure,
So
and
she was
she's
not
also
just a
still
pretty face.
right, but she's also still relevant.
Sure, to a certain degree. I would also say that she doesn't command Leo money.
I probably not.
I don't think she makes 20 to 30 million a movie. I would honestly say, like, a lot of what she does as an aging actress, she doesn't take the pretty parts anymore. She takes the, like, more matriarchal roles, the more whatever roles. I would be surprised if she makes more than 4 or 5 million a movie. But she's also worked really hard at it. Like, I would be willing to bet that, like, she, you look at Leo, he was a child actor first. Like, he's literally been acting in Hollywood since he was like 5 or 6 years old. And I'm willing to bet there's plenty of women who've done the exact same thing. And the problem is like, Leo is now in his 50s. Here's the other issue that is a disparity, is that I'm sure that, like, during the beach and during Titanic, there were scenes with him with his shirt off, right, when he had it. I look at Leo now, and I'm willing to bet that he's aged like most men. He's got a dad bod on him. Like, I look at him, I'm not trying to be mean. His face still looks good, but, like,
Right.
I don't think you're going to see many.
No, he's not a Wolverine.
He's not Wolverine.
What's the guy's
Hugh
name?
Jackman.
Hugh Jackman.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he's 55 now.
And he works out like a
but
machine.
he has actually flat out told the studio,
Right.
if you want me for another Wolverine movie,
CGI that shit.
CGI that shit, because I'm not going to do it. I'm
Yeah.
miserable. My family is miserable. Like,
Right.
I have to take so much time and effort into doing
Right.
this. Sucks to suck. Hire another man or CGI that shit.
Right, and I think for women, like, that, here's the issue. Like, a lot of times you want girls in a low-cut dress, you want people
Sure.
in the bikini
It was the
shots.
size 2 thing.
Right, and,
Yeah.
like, there is a timeline where if you have kids, you're done. If you get past a certain age, you're done. And yeah, like, I think that there is a body, just like, where you never saw Sean Connery without a shirt on past, like, his Bond days. Like,
Sure.
I'm sure there was a reason. Like, you sag in certain areas, like, things aren't all what they used to
CGI
be.
wasn't a thing.
Yeah, right.
Sure.
And, like, I think there is a disparity there, but I also think that women don't care. Like, women aren't, like, the reason why you liked Mel Gibson back in the day, the reason why you liked Sean Connery, the reason why you liked these older, aging people has nothing to do with what their abs, the state of their abs are, the state of their muscles, or, whether they got a little dad bod on them. It's the idea of what brings into them, because I've always heard this to be true, is, like, men are very physical and very visual in what they're attracted to, and women tend to go off of ideas. And the old joke is that's why women wear makeup and men lie.
That's funny.
But, yeah, like, I think that that's the thing. Like, I think the reason why that men are allowed to be sex symbols late in life has to do with the fact that it's the idea of them that you find sexy, that women find sexy, whereas with women it's much more physical. And I think to blame men and say, well, you shouldn't be that way, it's wrong of you because of how it affects women and how it affects their psychology, I think that's fundamentally
I mean, from a
inaccurate.
pay disparity standpoint, like, that's fine. Like, bottom line is that by and large, men have longer careers.
Correct.
So that makes sense to me. Like, if you have a 20-year tenure of proven results, role after role, which actually, like, let's take Nicolas Cage, because we've been talking about him a lot because of whatever, Renfield.
Right.
He made horrible movies, like, just horrible movies, and took very, very little pay. But the fact is that it still added to his catalog of tenure.
Sure.
Which is like, so you were talking about, like, Jennifer Lawrence. So she was acting for however many years during the Hunger Games, but you can't really count the number of years where she wasn't acting.
Sure.
Like, you could say, like,
she took time off having kids.
She took time off having kids, whereas, like, Nicolas Cage, you're like, no, he's been acting for the last, however many years consistently, badly,
right,
but still consistently. And so, like, you know what, like, now he's starting to get better roles again, and I think it's just that he's taking better scripts.
Well, I think he can afford to, because the issue with him...
Yeah, the issue with him was, like, the whole spending thing, which is, like...
Right, like, he spent too much money when he was doing all of his, like, The Rock
Right.
whatever, and the role started drying up for, like, the we're going to pay you a ton of money roles.
Right.
And what ended up happening is he went bankrupt because his spending was what it was.
Right.
And then the bankruptcy court said, well, you need to keep acting. So he, like, I think there was an issue where he wasn't legally allowed to turn down roles. So, like he literally acted in anything, and it kind of became a trope because, you know, when you're talking about these lower budget movies, you don't have time. So it's just like, you know, go make it a thing happen.
Just
and people
do
were
it.
hiring him to be the meme of Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
But the last thing I wanted to talk about was actually get back to Shameless, because the actress who was the lead on the show, who I loved in the first few seasons, by the way, she did an amazing job. So the idea of Shameless was that there's this family and the parents are alcoholics and the children basically had to raise themselves in South Chicago.
Sure.
So the oldest sister, whose name escapes me, was basically the lead of the show, but the father was the only named actor who was... God, I'm forgetting his name too, which is funny because he's from around these parts. But it was the guy from Fargo. I can see his face. William H. Macy.
Yeah. Okay.
So he had already had an Academy Award. Like he was known as one of the great actors
it's a tactic they do all the time, where you have a whole bunch of nobodies and the one guy.
Right.
Or girl.
And he was the one guy. He was very famous, and I think he wanted to do television because it's a steadier work than like in movies, and you know gives as a smaller role. I think like he had more time for his family and things of that nature, which totally makes sense. But they were paying him $1 million an episode.
Right.
So like I said, what they do in these series is they tie people down in contracts for like 5 seasons or whatever.
Sure.
So he's getting $1 million episode for 5 seasons while she's the star, and she's doing a fantastic job, and people are falling in love with her character, and she's bringing people in along the journey. So their contracts end, their first contracts, and they want to keep the show going. So the girl goes to the producers and says, I want what he got paid. And they're like, sure, we can pay you $1 million an episode now. And they're like, no. I carried the show for that 5 years. I want you to retroactively pay me what he got paid for that time. And it's like, first things first, that's stupid.
Yeah.
Because when you're ever negotiating a contract, it's not like that you can look at what
moving forward.
It's moving forward.
Yeah.
So it's like, you can't say like, because anytime someone hires you, regardless if it's a movie or anything else, it's a risk. Like you might not show the results that they hired you to get. It's a risk.
Sure. I mean, so here's my thing on that. So first, everybody across the entire, known universe is able to be a Monday morning quarterback.
Right.
All the time.
Sure.
I mean, if it's already happened, I can tell you what happened.
Right.
Like, that's stupid. But the other thing is, which I think we had talked about earlier, was this like proof of product, right? So like I'm a carpenter, right? And I make 5 cabinets and I sell 5 cabinets at each $100.
Sure.
So I've made $500. And then I make my 6th cabinet and I sell it for $500.
Right.
I can't go back to my first 5 customers and say, you retroactively owe me $400 because I've now proven that I can sell this same cabinet for $500.
Right.
Like,
it was a $500 cabinet all along.
Yeah, it was a $500 cabinet all. Like, bitch, please.
Right.
Like, are you out of your ever-loving mind?
Because one of the reasons why, because you also got to think that studio took a chance on her to begin with. Like, she was a nobody when they hired her. And they built her for that 5 years. Like even though you were only getting paid whatever, like let's say $100,000. I don't know what her paycheck was during that 5 years. Let's say $100,000, like a tenth of William H. Macy's. They're paying you a very good amount of money because they saw potential.
Well, not just that, you're developing your skill.
Right.
Like, let's not. I mean, if we're really gonna like talk logistics, you're a new actress. You're working on a new show. And you're working with somebody who has already won an accolade in this field. Right. So if it has
their own like amount of fans that they're going to
bring
not
with
just
them.
That, but you don't have fans.
Like, but I'm not even talking about fans because fans are fickle. I'm talking about like skill. Right. If this person has won an accolade in this field, then that means that he has a certain amount of skill, right? Or methodology or something that he does to get him recognized. So you can't come at me in any field and put two people in front of me and say, this person has an accolade, this person has none, this person has been in the field for X amount of years, this person has not. And then you want me to like pay for training you, like as a back thing. Like, I'm paying you $1 and I'm training you, and then when we get to the end of your training, you want me to pay you again.
Right.
Like, I was already paying you and training you.
Sure.
And now you want me to pay you again because you did a good job? Like, you want some weird retroactive bonus?
Sure.
Like, I'm willing... Like, if you had phrased it differently and said, you know what? Because I did such a good job over the last 3 years, and I did this amount of things, I believe that I'm entitled to this pay, plus a $500,000 bonus, because I might have swallowed that a little bit more than I want to be retroactively paid, you know, in perpetuity for my back work. Like, no.
Right. I mean, because here's the other part of that, right? Like that company spent a lot of money on their promotion building your star.
Right.
So like there's money that was spent helping you that you didn't even see.
That you didn't even have, not only that you didn't see, but like you didn't have a hand in. We didn't ask you to come in and give us ideas and help us work and make a product.
And one of the reasons why your character was so good and that you were able to act on is because the writer room that we also paid for.
Right, that we also paid for, because you didn't come up with the words. You didn't come up with the blocking. You weren't sitting here with the lighting and the mic and all the things. Like, again, like, we paid you and trained you and gave you all the tools and material. And we promoted the crap out of you. Like, again, if you want to come at me with, like, I deserve a bonus, maybe we'll talk about a bonus.
Well, but I feel like could have been an argument if she had been wanting to play it, you know, to the studio, is to say, look, you're paying him $1 million. I do more work than him and I'm a bigger draw. Now, pay me $1.2 million an episode, and in time I will surpass that. Like, I feel like I could have swallowed that. Because, like, you know, I will eventually have made more than him over time, that I'm continually giving you a product that you're selling. But when you retroactively want to renegotiate for work you've already done...
I mean, I'm already at, like, bitch, please. Like, please turn around. Please exit. Please close the door behind you and come back when you have something better to say. Because right now, that's just flat stupid.
Because here's the thing, is like, here's the thing. Like, she wanted to bitch about, like, how they were doing this to her and they were doing that to her and all the things. But here's the reality. She left the show and I've never seen her work again. And the reason why is like, I can't imagine hiring that person or trusting that person.
So here's my thing. Especially, I mean, in any job market, but especially in Hollywood. I mean, your reputation precedes you. Maybe less so when you're in the actual corporate job market, because it's not like somebody from SBC Global is going to call somebody from Fidelity when you're switching fields and whatever and say, this person, whatever. But like in Hollywood, 100%. This person did this, said this, acted this way, showed up late, did whatever. Don't hire them. Trust me. Headache. Right? So when that kind of story gets out, like... You've got to think before you do things. Like, I feel, I've never been an actor. But I feel like if I were an actor, half my job is really being a good politician for myself. Is, you know, how do I represent myself? How do I, like, project and protect my image and my reputation? Because the moment that somebody thinks that I'm a hassle or a diva or that I'm incompetent, I'm fucked.
It's like, what's her name that was on Grey's Anatomy and did Knocked Up? Katherine Heigl?
Yeah, Katherine. She did. And that actually, she made me so mad because I actually really liked her character.
Never seen.
Grey's Anatomy?
Never saw it.
Yeah, it was good up until, I don't know.
It wasn't?
Like,
yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then it was
I will
awful.
say this, though. The girl who played Grey, the main actress.
Yeah. Pompey or something like that?
Yeah, she did USO Tour, so I've met her, but I've never seen the show. But she's a really lovely person.
She seems lovely. Yeah. But regardless, like, Katherine Heigl left such a bad taste in my mouth, and I can only imagine what her reputation is in Hollywood, because if she affected the public to such a degree that when you look at her, you think, ew, gross. Like, I can only imagine what her reputation is in Hollywood.
Like, she's toxic. I mean, because here's the thing, because, like, she went after even Knocked Up, like her biggest, most successful film.
She was just bitched and complained.
Right. So it's like, why would I... Because here's the thing, like, you now have people who kind of sided with her, and it's like, ooh, that movie was gross. That movie wasn't as feminist as I want it to be. So it's like, if I am one of the producers on Knocked Up, and I see a dip in, like, DVD sales, or, like the film isn't as popular as it once was... I'm now thinking, like, that's money that you left on the table because you badmouth the situation as one of the stars. Like, anytime...
Well, what is it? Like, you don't shit where you eat?
Right.
Like, that was the very first time that I heard her complain about an environment, like a work product that she produced. I was like, you're an idiot. Why would you ever complain about a work product that you produced in a non-constructive way? Like, you brought up Leo a couple of times.
Right.
But, like, let's say that Leo is sitting on some interviewer's couch and they're talking about Titanic, right? Because that was one of his early breakout, huge movies. And he legitimately kind of leans forward and is looking at the interviewer, and he's like, I recently rewatched it and I felt like...
It was a bad movie.
In this particular scene, I could have done this to really draw in the audience, or I could have projected this emotion better, or I could have, moved my body in this way to really make a connection with another. Like, that to me is not complaining. That is, I looked back at my prior work, I critiqued myself, gave myself constructive criticism so that I can grow and learn and whatever. But what she did was she just bitched.
Right, and like
that's not...
Well, the thing with Leo, talking about Titanic, is like there was a lot of talk on set that both him and Kate Winslet, it was a miserable shoot. They were cold, they're underwater, long days. Neither one of them got paid shit, by the way, for that film. But it made both of their careers. Like, they made their money elsewhere because of it. But, like, that movie makes billions of dollars, and I think he got paid like $1.5 million. Sure. Like Leo did. And you think about, like, all, like, the movie that launched 1,000 magazine covers. Everyone was the Leo fanboy after that. And he got none of that money. Sure. Just not nothing. But it
Can you imagine him going back now and being like, I want, like the Shameless girl?
Half!
Just like the insanity. Can you imagine Leo and Kate at the same time being like, we're in solidarity. We want to walk in arm and be like, we want, 5 million, 10 million. We want a percentage of this in perpetuity. Like, what?
Right.
What?
Right. I mean, it's a ridiculous idea because, like, here's the thing. They took a risk on two unknowns at the time. Right. And they put, at the time, I believe, Titanic cost $600 million. Yeah. Like something redonkulous.
Yeah, no, it's... Well, anytime you've got, like, a water shoot. Like,
yeah, I mean, like, it went over budget. It was supposed to be, like, $300 million, and it went up to $500 million. Like, it was a redonkulously expensive thing that they spent backing you, like, as a spectacle at the time. It was the most spectacle movie of that era. And, whereas he didn't make any money on the magazines that were being sold about him, how much publicity is that for his next commanding movie? Yeah. Because I guarantee you, I think his next film he made $20 million for. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think that that movie made his career. Sure.
But yeah, like, I mean, going back to your, like, Shameless girl, like, no, that was the stupidest thing that she
could have done. She never worked again.
And never, she took her career and she said, hey, career, here's a gun. I'm going to shoot you in the face. You're going to love it. It's going to be great.
Right, because we're standing on principle. Because, I feel like I deserved it, so therefore I asked for it. No. And it's like, here's the thing. Even if she had, like, re-signed for the same amount that she made initially. Like, let's say, hypothetically, she was making $100,000 per episode. Sure. That's still $100,000 a week more than she got making nothing because no one ever fucking hired her ass again.
Yeah, like, I mean, again, like, I feel like the bonus I would have swallowed a little better. I don't know if they would have given her a bonus. I don't, whatever.
Being open to that negotiation. Because you're still paying you $1 million an episode at that point. Like, that's what they agreed to, and she's like, no, I want everything. Backlog? Yeah, and then, like, everybody... Because here's the thing, right? Like everything in film nowadays is either going on television, which is a long thing, or it's going on a movie series. So, like a series of films, like a series of intellectual property. So, if I sign her to be the lead of my new television show, right? I sign her for a contract to 3 or 4 years. So, let's say I get to the end of that 4 years and we need to renegotiate. I don't trust that she's going to negotiate fairly So all of a sudden, like, let's assume that I put all of this money creating this television show, and it's a big hit, which is not a guarantee, but like, it's probably going to fail. But like, I put all of this money on the happenstance that it's a big success, and we work really hard, and we hire all the good writers, and we put all of this money, and it is a success. And now she points that gun around and says, you're making all of this money, and I'm only making $1 million an episode, so therefore you owe me. And why would I ever invest that? The same in a movie series. Like, oh, you're going to be worth $10 million a movie? Cool, you're willing to accept that? Okay.
Oh my God, can you imagine the actors from the Marvel, like MCU, going back and saying, we want... I mean, they're 12. They're 12 films deep now, or something. Can you imagine? Like, I want 12 films deep.
Right.
Because I think that's the other thing that a lot of people don't think about, and maybe I think about it a little bit more because I had a somewhat litigious career previously. But like, you always have to think about what kind of precedent are you setting.
Right.
And actually, so like I talked about this. To our daughter frequently, which I feel like is like
You're talking yourself right out of a job. Is what you're doing.
Well, not just that, but like when I'm talking to like a 10-year-old about like what kind of precedent are we setting, and then she talks to her friends and she's like, "Well, what kind of precedent are we setting?" Like they have no idea what's. But like I because I came from like a somewhat litigious career, like I think about that frequently, and I'm like, people need to constantly think about what kind of precedent are you setting, because let's say that. For whatever weird stroke of reality, Shameless girl goes in and says, I want the backlog, right?
So 5 seasons and $1 million episodes, so that's $50 million.
But she sets this precedent.
Right.
And it's not just for her.
Right.
She has now set this precedent
for everyone.
Hollywood-wide. So, like, maybe she didn't think about that, but, like, when I'm talking to our daughter, and I'm like, no. When I make a decision, and you ask me, well, why didn't you, our daughter says, well, why didn't you give me permission to do that? And I'm like, because I thought about what precedent I was setting.
Right.
Because if I told you that you could do, let's make up a stupid example. Like, if I told you could have cake at 10 p.m. today, that means that tomorrow
at 10 p.m.
You think you could have cake.
Right.
And I don't ever want you thinking that you could have cake at 10 p.m.
Sure.
And, like, that's a rather stupid example.
Sure.
But, like, she thinks about the things that she asks.
Well, because she's not the only female in the cast. Like, what? So, like, then what happens when every single one of her co-stars
goes back and says,
well, I don't. She got back pay. Well, we want back pay.
We want back pay.
Right. I mean, again, like, no one at no point. Because here's the thing. Anytime you're making a film, a television show, you're making an investment that could totally blow up in your face.
Sure.
So, and you're making that investment really not for the first season to make money, but like you want to make the series long enough that you can get into syndication. Right. Like that you can get the real money, that you can do like the Friends deal or the whatever, where they're like selling it to Netflix for like $200 million. Like that's where the money
is. You need enough seasons to have, to be able to syndicate. Because if you can't... Let's be honest. If you can't syndicate a television series,
there's no money.
You basically just sunk.
Right, whatever you made for the first couple of seasons. So it's like going into season 1, there's no guarantee that we're going to get to syndication. So everything is an investment, hoping because most seasons fail within they don't even get a full season.
They 6 episodes.
Yeah, they get like 6 episodes and canceled. So like I'm putting all of this money in on the hopes that maybe we can make it, and then. If we do, the knowledge that you are going to use that against me in negotiation.
Not a chance.
I would never hire anyone
to
do that. Like, I want you to be grateful. I want it to be fair. I'm not trying to screw everyone. But a lot of times the reason why you go with these unknown people in the beginning is because you don't have to pay them. Like, they don't feel this entitlement to these large paychecks, because ultimately that's can be what sinks these shows, what sinks these movies.
Well, that's what happens when, like, let's do, like, The Big Bang Theory, where they have a fairly large cast. Or, like, you could go the Friends thing, where they have a fairly large cast, and you're however many seasons deep. And the one actor, is like, hey, I'm one of 7, and I'm the one who's getting paid, 3/4 as much as everybody else. And then that's when you really have the actors acting in solidarity, saying, you know what, we mostly, for this, for the sake of argument, we mostly have the same screen time.
Right.
We mostly have the same fan base. So you know what, some of us will take a pay cut, and we will all equally be paid whatever
I think
the
by the end they were
number.
getting paid $1 million an episode each.
Well, whatever the number works out to. Like at that point, it's not about
Right.
we want whatever number. It's this
Right.
is the total budget. Divide the total budget by the total number of
Right.
main list actors, and we will all be fairly compensated. And I feel like, sure, if you've got a proof of product that's 7
Right.
seasons deep and still has a phenomenal fan base, and you want to go in as a collective,
Right.
but again, this is still moving forward. This
Right.
isn't.
Retroactive.
Last season I got three
Right.
quarters of what they
I mean,
got.
I think they negotiate together, but like, it's also interesting when you have something like Seinfeld, which I know we're getting a little overtime here, but I wanted to finish this out. Whereas like Seinfeld was not only the lead actor on Seinfeld.
Also, he's the name of the show.
He's the name of the show. He was one of the head writers, but he also owned the production.
Sure.
He owns Seinfeld. Like Seinfeld owns
Is
Seinfeld.
his, yeah.
Right. So like there have been complaints from George and the girl, I can't think.
I don't know her name.
That there's a pay disparity, and that he should owe them something, and it's like no. Here's the thing, right? When you get hired to do season 1, the reason why Jerry Seinfeld makes more money than you is because if it failed, it was his thing. He owned it.
He failed.
He failed. It would have been his money that was a loss. Like
Sure.
you did not partake in that risk
Right.
with him. That if it failed, it would have because here's the thing.
You want equal reward. So here's my
Right.
thing. You want equal reward, but no liability.
Right, because there's nobody from the countless failed television shows saying, I retroactively...
We'll take on some of that liability. Here's $10,000,
Right.
because I'm going to help you. My paltry $10,000.
Right, I got paid $100,000 an episode for a series that made no money. Here's some of that money back to just kind of like, nobody
ever does that.
So the idea is that like when they hired the girl from Shameless, there's like, this could tank, this could cost us the house, but we're agreeing to pay you $100,000 an episode no matter what.
However, we're going to put an addendum at the end of your contract that if it fails and we get canceled at the end of season 1, we get to take $10,000 of every one of your paychecks back.
That never happens. So, but like, here's the thing, like, because Shameless was a success, and because Seinfeld was a success, they're like, well, the $100,000 an episode that you were giving me retroactively doesn't seem enough.
No.
Like, that's a stupid thing, because like I said, there's no guarantee that it was going to become Seinfeld.
Right.
So, like, all of the people who put the risk in are the ones getting the reward, and like, when you signed your contract, it was good enough for you. Because you didn't know where it was going to go. But now that it's a success, you want to like partake in that, and like that's a stupid way of looking at it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Right.